Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. How are you all doing, gang? I've been praying to all the weather gods that the ground is going to dry up in time for the Glastonbury Festival. And today, I put up my tent for the first time in 2 years just to make sure everything was in order. But enough of me. What have you been up to? Any new technology excite you? Remember, if you want to say hi, ask a question, or bounce ideas around, or even come on the show, you can find all my contact details and social channels over on my website, techblogwriter.co.uk. And as long as you don't start with a sales pitch, I reply to every single message. But on with today's show, and I recently read that there are 3 items to keep in mind when creating a data architecture that can stand the test of time. Can you guess what they are? I'm going to pass you over to Steve Borgman to give you a few seconds to think.
Developers.
The video of that speech still cracks me up to this day, and I urge you to watch it if you haven't. But I digress, of course. I'm not going to reveal what those 3 items were. We'll hear about those in the interview in a moment. But the 3 items that I did mention were from Justin Borgman, and he's the CEO of Starburst Data, the largest contributor to the Presto open source project outside of Facebook. But he also went on to talk about how each item plays a specific role in creating optionality. So I wanted to find out more, and guess what? I invited him on the show. And thankfully, he said yes. And as CEO of Starburst Data, he is understandably incredibly busy and booked up in back-to-back meetings every day. But I managed to secure a few minutes with him in his car. Yes, now I know you're intrigued. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Boston so we can speak with Justin Borgman, CEO of Starburst Data. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Justin Borgman, founder and CEO of Starburst. And Starburst is the company behind the Presto project, which is a open source project for doing SQL analytics on data anywhere. And we can talk more about that.
Fantastic. And my understanding is that Starburst gives analysts the freedom to analyse diverse data sets, but wherever their location and without compromising on performance. But for many people listening and just tuning in now, they're going to be hearing about you guys for the first time. So for those people, what is Starburst and what problems do you solve and what makes you unique from all those other solutions out there?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, what makes us unique is that the technology, Presto, was something that was actually originally developed at Facebook and used at Facebook really as a replacement for a technology they had previously called Hive for doing SQL queries against data sitting in their massive Hadoop environment. And so, Presto was really designed about 7 years ago to be a faster, more interactive solution for SQL analytics there at Facebook. And as a result, it's been proven at massive scale. And I think that's what makes us unique, at least certainly among startups in the data analytics space, is that the question of does your product work or does your product scale, we can sort of point to some of the high profile users. Certainly Facebook is one large example, but also many of the large internet companies have been using this technology for quite some time, including Twitter and LinkedIn and Uber and Lyft and Netflix and Airbnb and so forth.
And I think I'm right in saying this. I think Starburst Data is the largest contributor to the Presto open source project outside of Facebook. So can you tell me more about the 3 key items to keep in mind when actually creating a data architecture that can stand the test of time?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it really all comes down to creating optionality for yourself as you move forward. And I think what that means is, there are a few components to that. First and foremost, I would say wherever possible, use or leverage or take advantage of storage compute separation. Now, this is sort of a hot topic these days as people move to the cloud. You have this natural benefit of keeping your data in that underlying cloud storage. If it's AWS, it might be S3. If it's Azure, it might be ADLS or Blob. If it's in Google, it might be GCS. And regardless of which cloud you've chosen, you want to keep as much data as possible in that storage tier because it's the least expensive place to store it. And so economics sort of drive that decision. And now you have separation where you can elastically scale up and down the compute side independently of that storage. And that gives you a lot of flexibility because you could scale up when you have particularly heavy workloads and scale down perhaps at night when the workload is less. You can scale up and scale down based on demand, different sort of load scenarios. If suddenly you're getting a lot of usage of the platform, you can automatically scale it up and down. So that gives you a lot of cost efficiency. So really, sort of number one would be, take advantage of storage compute separation. I think number two would be use open data formats wherever possible. And this is really part of the legacy of the Hadoop world is that these open data formats were created, things like Parquet or ORC file or Avro, or even JSON, XML, CSV files, etc. The beauty about those file formats is that you can query them and access them and work with them from a variety of tools. And so you're not locked into any one particular vendor if you store your data in that format. That by contrast, if you're storing it in a proprietary database system, then you're locked into that proprietary database system to access that data. So the second point that I always make is essentially keep your data in open data formats. And then the third and final point is wherever possible, create a abstraction layer for actually executing those SQL queries. So for example, you might have data sitting in a data lake. You might have data sitting in a traditional database like Oracle or Teradata. You might have data sitting in a cloud database like Redshift or Snowflake. And in any of these cases, you want to be able to analyze all of that data regardless of where it is. You don't want to have to move that data around from one data source to the other. So if you create this abstraction layer, this sort of query federation layer, data virtualization layer, many different terms that mean essentially the same thing, you now have the flexibility to adjust where that data is stored over time. You're sort of decoupling your user from the underlying infrastructure technology. So that's really the third point I like to make, which is that SQL abstraction layer. And I think if you do those three things, if you embrace storage compute separation, if you use open data formats, and you use a SQL abstraction layer, that gives you tremendous flexibility to adapt your architecture over time. The underlying data store may change. It may go from Hadoop to object storage in the cloud. It may go from a particular database to a different database. And as long as you've sort of abided by those three tenets, you should be in good shape.
And we will have a lot of business leaders listening that are ruled by ROI of almost everything. So for anyone listening that adheres to those three items or those three rules that we've just talked about there, what benefits or tangible benefits will it offer businesses?
Yeah, so I think really two things. First of all, the ability to optimize for cost and performance, and really turn the dial on cost and performance. It's not a binary thing anymore as you move into the cloud. You really have the ability to tune that in one direction or the other based on your needs. So using an architecture that embodies this separation of storage and compute allows you to adjust the compute resources, which is where the bulk of your spend is. You can adjust that based on your needs, and therefore you're getting more efficiency out of your environment. The way that we used to do this for the past several decades was that you would buy your hardware and your software license up front. Maybe on an annual basis, you would assess your infrastructure, or sometimes even on a multi-year basis, you would assess your infrastructure, and you'd say, I need more capacity. And you would buy to that maximum capacity that you needed. And unfortunately, that means you end up overbuying, particularly hardware and software licenses, because you have to buy to fit that max use case. The cloud gives you far more flexibility there and the ability to be more efficient with your spend. So you're really only spending money on what you're actually using. And And so that's the cost performance benefit. And then the other I would say is really sort of speed and agility. Again, being able to be flexible and access data where it lives means you can get answers to your questions, your business questions, much faster. You don't have to necessarily engage IT to do a ETL or data migration project to get the data that you need in one place. You can just access it via query. And I think that's very powerful from a time to market and time to business value perspective.
And outside of technology, I always try to explore the backstory of a company on this Daily Tech podcast too. And I believe that Starburst Data was spun out from Teradata back in late 2017. Can you tell me a little bit more about that journey?
Yeah, it is a little bit of an unusual beginning. So actually, my first company was called Hadapt, which was a SQL engine for Hadoop, and that was bought by Teradata in 2014. And so through that acquisition, we ended up at Teradata, and I became the VP GM of a business unit focused on open source technologies, and Hadoop in particular, but more broadly open source technologies. And while I was there, we had a few different products, but one of them was really us getting involved in this open source project back when it was still very early, and Facebook and just a handful of other internet companies were the only ones really using it at that time. And so, our goal was to make it enterprise grade, to add, important security features that just didn't exist at that point. And over that period of time, really from 2014 to 2017, we became such large committers to the project that we thought, maybe there's an opportunity to create a business dedicated to this technology that we love so much. So really in 2017, as you mentioned, we all separated from Teradata and worked out a relationship that allows Teradata to continue to sell Presto, and we support their customers. But we also have our independent business that's growing independently as well. And so it's a great beginning to a company. We started with revenue, customers, and a team that knew the space so well. And it was really a nice head start.
And you work with some huge names in business. So I've got to ask, are you noticing any trends in the kind of challenges that are facing all of your customers? And how are you helping them overcome these challenges that they're coming to you with?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the most obvious challenge is that the desire to get to the cloud is stronger than ever. It's something we've been talking about perhaps for a decade, but it's only become really real with the large enterprises, in the last couple of years. And it's now a real strategic priority for these folks to modernize their architectures, consolidate their data into one cloud perhaps, or perhaps even multiple clouds. And there's a real challenge of sort of how do I do that without disrupting the business users I have today and the operations of the business today. Certainly we can't, let anything fall down as we're making this transition. And so that's again where we try to step in and say, no problem. Don't move your data overnight. You can use Presto as this abstraction layer, access the data where it lives today, while you sort of take your time to do that migration strategy to your cloud vendor of choice. And so again, it gives you a lot of optionality, a lot of flexibility, and I think that's what enterprises are looking for today.
And Starburst is a Presto company founded by leading developers of the open source Presto project. But can you tell me more about how Starburst, Twitter, and the Presto Software Foundation are all hosting their data innovators at their annual Presto Summit? And also, what can visitors expect from that summit?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Presto Summit is on June 20th. We're looking forward to it. And essentially what we're hosting is many of the larger Presto users who've been using Presto for quite some time. And they're going to talk about their individual use cases. So you're going to hear from, large Fortune 500 enterprises, as well as internet companies that were born in the cloud. And you'll see the various breadth of use cases for Presto, right there live by some of the people using it. And so it's a great opportunity to learn from your peers, learn from other folks and what they're doing, as well as get a glimpse of the roadmap for Presto, because many of these large users also happen to contribute to the project. And so it's a pretty vibrant community, and you'll get a good flavor for both how they use it and also some of their plans to improve it. Of course, Starburst is a big player in that as well, and so we'll be also talking about some of our big plans for moving the project forward as well.
And speaking of moving forward and looking ahead, is there anything else that you can share with us today about the future?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's continued interest to think about Presto as something of a virtual data warehouse. The ability to, again, access data regardless of where it lives, while still giving that business user, that BI user, perhaps that data scientist who wants to write ad hoc SQL queries, a uniform experience regardless of where that data lives. So, there's activity and interest in data catalogs. There's interest in adding more transactional capabilities to make it more of an active data warehouse. And then, of course, certainly there's interest in using Presto within Kubernetes. That's a hot topic as well. So these are all things that we'll discuss at the Presto Summit.
Now, none of us are able to achieve success without a little help along the way. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you today as well is there a particular person that you're grateful towards who's helped you to get where you are?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. And I think I'll actually name maybe two, if I may.
Sure.
One is certainly my mother, who I think taught me how to work hard, hopefully how to be an honest person, how to treat people. And just learned a tremendous amount just watching her, the way that she lived her life. And then I think professionally, I was very fortunate in my first company to have some great mentorship, actually from a number of people, but one person in particular, a guy named Chris Lynch, who was the CEO of a company called Vertica, which was another database company, sold to HP maybe in 2011, 2012, and he joined the board of my first company and taught me a great deal. So I owe a lot to him as well professionally. And I think you're absolutely right. Mentorship is key to growing and developing, both as a person and professionally. So I've been very lucky.
Fantastic. Well, a huge thank you for joining me on the podcast today. But before I do let you go, could I just ask that you remind everyone listening of where they can find you guys online, and also equally contact a member of your team if they've got any questions, and also that Presto Summit as well, where they can find you there.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go to www.starburstdata.com. That's our website. You'll find information about Presto there, information about the extra enterprise features that we offer with our distribution, and you'll also find information about the Presto Summit as well. So feel free to visit us there. We also have an online chat there, so if you have questions, feel free to reach out.
Excellent. Well, I'll add all those links to the blog post that accompanies this podcast. But more than anything, just a huge thank you for joining me on the podcast today to discuss the data architecture freedom and all the benefits that brings to businesses, and taking that time to come and speak with me about that today. So thanks again for coming on.
My pleasure, Neil. Thanks so much for having me.
By adhering to the three items we discussed, enterprises can preserve their optionality, essentially enabling them to better control costs and gain the most of their architecture investments. But I'm not a developer, and I suspect some of you listening are much, much more qualified to talk about data architecture freedom than I am. But that's okay, because that's what this show's about. It is me, the guest, and you. So this is your moment to shine. Bust a few myths, set the record straight, share your opinions or your insights. And you can do all that by emailing me techblogwriter@outlook.com. Pop by my website, techblogwriter.co.uk. You'll find 900 interviews around just about every area of technology, and also links to all the social channels if you just wanted to drop me a quick DM on one of them. And if you do end up following me on something like Twitter, don't just follow me. Send me a quick message saying, Neil, I listened to the podcast. I just wanted to say hi. That's what it's all about. But before I ramble on anymore and outstay my welcome in your daily commute, I'm going to make my excuse and go, and I'll return tomorrow with another guest. But a big thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.